It's just lovely. So I've been really looking forward to this session for a couple of months since Bebar's introduced us first. So the topic is around how do you align the mindsets of small businesses, CEOs, or startup CEOs with that of corporates. And this is an area that is of particular interest to me. I have worked with a lot of small businesses that are trying to figure out, first of all, how do you sell your services to big corporates? And then at a later stage, how do you get acquired by big corporates? The reason I'm so excited to meet with Paul, and I think you've probably heard his introduction several times over the last couple of days, but Paul is a very established angel investor, and also, of course, CEO of Turk Telecom that's acquired a number of companies. So, Paul, before I kind of get into some of the questions on that, do you have an opening statement around the topic, around the alignment of corporate CEOs and startup CEOs?
Let's go for Q&A. But I can say something if you want.
It's been a long 2 days.
Yeah, no, I can say something if you want. I mean, just very quickly. I think, first of all, as I very much believed in, and this is specific to a telecom company, convincing that the company should acquire, especially IT companies, and we made 4 acquisitions. It was an interesting experience for me to try to convince the board, and especially, if you like, government board members who consider this to be not the business of this company. I mean, they were not against the idea of it. So the first part was that. So the only way that I could make this thing happen in this particular case was to convince the IT companies, which were run by their founders, to give up all their shares. So I therefore had to buy them out. So it had to be 100% or nothing. I then aligned those CEOs along with, for example, let's say chiefs of the company. So they became a CEO of a company, yes, but then they get a salary and a bonus, and that's it. I also encouraged them to purchase telecom shares, and within a year, some of them were even asking me, how is the telecom EBITDA going? So this is specific to this particular case. Maybe this would work for some of the large Turkish companies that have a similar culture, where if you are an employee, for example, CEO of a large family group company, but you are an employee, and then you acquire a company in the name of your owners, but that CEO has equity and have their own interests, maybe they want to list it, it creates conflict. So I think this is the way I manage that particular conflict. So it's a good starting point.
So let's, so there's a couple of things I want to cover off. I think pulling back a bit, because I do want to drill into how you make these acquisitions work. But before we get to that, what are the advantages? Why are big companies looking to small companies? I mean, there's a perception amongst small companies, obviously, that you've got more resources than them. You've got bottomless pockets, is obviously the perception of small businesses. Why would you look to acquire a small business? What are big companies hoping to gain from that?
Well, the first comparative that people do is, can I build it myself? So let's say you're a telecom company and you say, I can build an IT company that does X, Y, Z. It needs to have a couple of hundred people, so you recruit 200 people. So these companies that I was very interested in, of course, you're interested in the specifics of these because so for example, the first one that I really liked was called Argela. And you could say that the founders owned something in the range, because they had an acquiring party who bought into them, so they had made some money already. And they probably owned around like 35-40%, and the other guys owned 60%. Their owners had nothing to do with them, business-wise. Those guys were in totally different business, like clothing and cement factory, and I mean nothing to do with IT. But they were passionate about them. There was one specific product I liked in Argela, which was a VoIP product, voice over IP. And I figured that if we can integrate that product into a mobile environment, we could be one of the earliest birds, let's say putting it onto a BlackBerry. Then we could do, for example, Wi-Fi voice. So while you're roaming, you can make cheaper calls, but you can something like that. So it was a product I liked.
So in that particular case, it was a specific product, and couldn't build it yourself. It was easier to just acquire the company.
And I believed in the management team. That and buying them out 100%. By the way, what shocks me is that they're still there now, which is like eight years later. Yeah. So that, and even though I left the company, and now I'm back. So
Okay. So one thing is clearly buying products that you don't have. Another thing might be market that you don't have.
Yeah.
What are some of typically, and I'm going to talk later about how you integrate these and some of the mistakes, and you kindly admitted you'd made every mistake going, which I think most corporates have.
I have made every single possible mistake anybody can make.
What are companies that you see that do acquisitions well? I mean, aside from Turk Telecom, companies like Google, like Amazon, they're big acquirers of companies.
Correct.
Who have you seen that you think is doing it well in their approach to expanding through acquisition?
I think that, from what I see, obviously these companies have different strategies. For example, so Google invests in companies that can open new verticals for them, also who are ahead of the curve in those particular activities. So I think Google is one of the maybe smartest investors in that sense. So they're really looking to building value, not necessarily building market. So it's more about product, technology. That's kind of like how that one works. I think Facebook have been very opportunistic, for example. So Facebook acquiring first Instagram and then WhatsApp also opens the question, why didn't a telecom company like AT&T buy WhatsApp, for example, for the same formulation of giving them shares? Because they would have acquired a base of maybe 400 or 500 million customers. Yep. So why a telco didn't do it, and how come Facebook did it? Of course, they had the convenience of listing, so they made those acquisitions. Then you ask yourself why Microsoft were even, why Microsoft bought Skype?
Skype or Minecraft.
Yeah, but actually Facebook was about to buy Skype, and that's what made Microsoft do it. They were one of the slower moving companies. And then, acquiring LinkedIn, I think at that price shocked me a lot. And as I now started getting into LinkedIn myself as a user, because I was avoiding these type of distractions because I was very busy doing certain things, but then I wanted to experience LinkedIn actually and understand why would they pay so much for it, and I'm shocked with the value of it. I'm really truly shocked. I'm doing now content search on it, and then I connect to people straight away with a DM. It's like then I understood its power, 500 million. So then maybe 26 billion or whatever is a lot of money, but they can afford it. So they would acquire it obviously for a customer base. In this case.
Okay, so you've product customer base, and I think I heard you say yesterday that you would encourage companies to look outside of their own sectors when they're doing acquisitions. Do you want to just expand on that?
Of course, that's one. That one is a little bit harder to explain in general, but I can explain it in the specifics of let me say what Turk Telecom will do, because then it's more relevant, and I can defend the idea because it's not a general idea.
Yeah.
So in this case, I definitely recommend it, and I'm trying to do it. So if you are a telco and you want to look at 5G going beyond the cost of it, but how are you going to build some revenue streams? So one approach that I believe in is to go for verticals. So I believe, for example, in the energy vertical, the health vertical, and the education vertical. Now, the first acquisition that I did under Turk Telecom was actually an education company, which I believe now we signed recently one of our largest private school contracts, which is a 5-year deal, big deal. We're going to extend that further. So that's one vertical, I think, which is more obvious since we have an activity. In the health area, I tried in my first term to move into that area, but it was a bit too early because it was pre-smartphones. I sometimes think shocking that the last time I was CEO of a telecom company, iPhone was only like 6 months in. We're all using BlackBerry, so the levels of apps were still a bit low and all of that. And then, of course, I was doing venture capital and stuff like that, so I wasn't thinking what telcos are doing anymore. When I came back, I thought the health sector, back to what I really was trying to do, at my time, is a very critical sector for the sick and the healthy. So we made our first acquisition, which we will be announcing soon, in that sector. I expect to do more things in the health sector where I think we need to acquire. In energy, probably we will do more of a partnership type, but we may make one acquisition because I very much believe in distributed renewable. And I think that that's something that electricity companies must do, otherwise they will die, and it's something that I don't want to do myself alone. So that, again, opportunistic. And smart city. Smart city, Innova are doing quite a lot of that. I'm very keen to make acquisitions in that space.
Okay, cool. So you started to touch on the companies that you're looking to acquire, and I want to move on to almost you with your angel hat on. How do companies prepare to be acquired, or how do they make themselves attractive for acquisition? Before we get onto that, just still with the kind of the corporate hat on, I had an example in Singapore recently where I was talking about acquisitions, and a woman came up to me working for a huge corporate that I won't name in Singapore, and she was very proud because they had just acquired 2 companies in America, because these 2 companies were incredibly innovative. They had fantastic creative staff, and so this company, which was quite staid and traditional, had brought these just 2 young companies, and she was moving to America the next day to rebrand them and teach them the corporate culture and how to work within this big staid company. And I was the idea of buying an innovative company for creativity and then rebranding it and trying to tell it how to think seemed a complete anathema to me. So let's talk about mistakes. Whether it's yours or others. What mistakes do you typically see occurring? Because I'm kind of conscious of it from a small business perspective, but what about from your perspective when you do these acquisitions and getting the most value from them?
Obviously, when you are making a startup decision, when you are actually making the startup, or if there is a planned startup and one is interested in investing in it, getting up to, let's say, early stage, maybe 2 years in, let's say, less than 3 years. I think that, and forget angel, I mean the angel is even pre that. I think that, for example, in Turk Telecom, when I came back, I found out that they had this pilot program, which actually is a form of accelerator, which is amazing. I'm very impressed by it. But as I indicated, I'm now shifting more into corporate venture capital, which is really scale up. So these are companies that have gone beyond 3 years.
Yep.
So anything before that, which is the hardest thing to do, probably should not be done by companies.
Right.
I mean, because if a company is going to do it, then I think that, you know, the CEO of the company must be personally responsible for them. Or he must allocate a really trusted chief that also believes but has authority, because, you know, the risk of failure is so high.
Yep.
And I think people working in companies don't like to fail, so therefore, in general, they don't take risk because it's not worth it for them. I mean, they have a job, they want to keep their job, they want to earn their bonus.
Yep.
So that culture clashes totally. So unless at least you have one person who's willing to say, I'm going to risk it, like I did, for example, and then, of course, you take all the blame if it doesn't work, and then you have to pass on the rewards if it does work. So that's the job of a CEO. This is why when I say I made every mistake possibly that you can make in your life, and I made a lot more than you did because I've lived longer than you. That's all.
I'm trying to catch up.
I made a lot of mistakes. So the mistakes, by definition, mean that you made investments in things that maybe you shouldn't have. So these are companies that turned out not to be right, or people that didn't turn out to be what you thought they would be. They were too greedy for us. I think greed is the biggest killer of this type of adventure. When the person you're investing in turned out to be more greedy than they should be, and then of course the company suffers a lot for it. Valuations, all those types of tensions. I think in general these are the areas where I've had failings.
Okay. All right, so I know that within the audience we've got a number of entrepreneurs. I also know we have a number of angel investors that have investments in companies that they would love to see acquired so that they can get a return on their investment. Yeah. What are some of the things, and obviously you're an angel investor in companies as well, so What are some of the things a small business could do to make themselves attractive to an acquisition partner like a big company?
As I've mentioned, the verticals, for example, or let's say smart city, for example, or even some horizontal. By horizontal, I mean if someone, for example, has, let's say, a very innovative product that can be mass market, for example, or if it's business, it has to be really very, very special, or in these verticals that I mentioned, they can write to me directly. And the way we do it is that we have a team that looks at anybody that would like to be considered, that they meet with them, and we have an
Paul uses LinkedIn, by the way. We just learned that.
Yeah,
find him on LinkedIn.
I mean, but you can write us and send an email. We also have a dedicated team under the strategy and business planning that is responsible only for this corporate venture capital, which is led primarily by myself and the chief of that area. So the easiest thing is to write to either me or to him, and then a team will meet. Generally, him and I don't meet. We don't attend the first meeting.
Okay, so just in terms of kind of tactical stuff, in terms of, so it's very, very easy for a company to drop you an email and say, hey, look, we'd like to meet. What are some of the mistakes that you see small businesses make when they're presenting? Because small businesses live in their own world, right? And they don't necessarily know why you would be wanting to acquire them. They want the acquisition, but they don't necessarily understand your motivations and what's going on. What are some of the simple mistakes that you see them making when they're presenting themselves to you that if they didn't make these mistakes, they would have a much further chance?
I mean, that's a very, very important question. So I think that one of the biggest mistakes that young companies or leaders of startups and companies is overconfidence. And when they talk to a potential investor in language that is not business language, because you can be as confident as you can claim you to be, because it'll be tested very soon. But it's more about whether you really have a product or whether you have some customer base. So for me, it boils down to that. Obviously, if you're a startup, you're unlikely to have a customer, but some of them, by the way, who've written to us, for example, have one strategic customer, which is great, which can be helpful for a big company. So if they understand that, and of course through a couple of emails, they would understand also perhaps what we are interested in, and then they would have a meeting. So the most important thing is to not to oversell with confidence. Say clearly what you have and what you're looking for. Because people don't invest in your companies because you're very confident and therefore they're going to make a return. And remember one thing, the person that you're talking to is not going to be the one investing in you. The person who will make the decision is an employee working in a company who himself has a salary and a bonus. And if this turns out sour, so there's nothing in it for that person. So we're not a fund with carry, like you have a fund structure, like the way you operate, for example. So you put deals together, you charge management fees, and then you get a carry charge. So you are incentivized by the success. I cannot do that in Turk Telecom because it wouldn't quite work. So I don't have those, correctives.
Yeah. So I want to talk about culture clashes in a second, but you've just reminded me of a conversation I had back in early 2000 with a friend of mine that ran quite a successful web hosting company in the UK. And he was, I was having a beer with him. Thank you.
If you want to give a question.
Oh, okay, cool. So I was having a beer with him, and I said, so what's the future for your company? And he said, well, by this time next year, we'll have been acquired by Yahoo. And I said, what? So you're already in talks with them? And he said, no, but last month I bonused all of my sales staff to go and steal Yahoo's customers. Basically undercut all of their web hosting customers by as much as it takes to win the business. And they'll come calling soon enough. And sure enough, within 3 months, he got the phone call from Yahoo saying, come in and talk to us. And shortly after that, they bought him because he was such a pain. That was quite a good strategy for doing it. Now, he also then had the typical culture clash of running his own small business to then being part of a bigger corporate, and it didn't last very well. So what are some of the lessons you've learned around protecting entrepreneurial corporate cultures, or how those entrepreneurial cultures should leverage off the brand and the resources that you've got? What are some of your lessons around that?
Actually, one of the first lessons that I myself had to learn was coming from managing things and then going towards investing in them, is that it's not my job to manage them. And of course, you have to resist that temptation. Because they need to manage themselves, and you know, I think at some point you need to give some guidance, and then if you have any guidance, I mean, for example, my method was the way at least I used to do operate in my formative venture capital period. For example, what I was doing was I was separating my day. Half of the day I was using it for motivational things, and the other half of the day I was using it for problem solving. So that when I'm trying to motivate people to do things, I myself was in a different psychology. So therefore I would be, for example, I think up of an idea, I would send a message like, this is a good idea, what do you think? Should I come over and discuss it? I think I can open a new door for you here. So this is more like that. So then I get that out of the way, and then I go back to the reality check of some of the companies that are not doing well. So that therefore I have this, because I was actually doing this mostly myself. I had some part-time help, but I was doing that mostly myself. And then when I was dealing with the problems, I had to be careful not to manage the problem, just to give guidance. And then from that, I was seeing if someone is very stubborn, like I really want to try that, I say, okay, well, you know my point of view, so just keep going and let me know in a month. So that's the way I was dealing with it. But of course, you know, let's say, man, why don't you do this? And then 3 months later, he discovered that he should have done it. And rarely has it been the case, unfortunately for me, where, you know, I said something that didn't turn out to be right, which is because of experience. I mean, so that's, of course, very frustrating, because then you waste money, you waste time, and that type of stuff. But you have to accept it. That's what you're buying into. That was the hardest thing for me, actually.
Okay. Let me just, because we're sort of short on time, but we've got a very interesting question from the audience, but it's more, again, about culture rather than specifically acquisition of a startup. But in terms of within Turk Telecom, how do you foster creativity within your business, and what have you learned from the startup world and the entrepreneurial world that you're able to sort of bring across into the corporate world? Actually,
my management method that I mentioned in one of the earlier sessions is very much activity based. So I tend to work with a program management unit. So if I'm working on a project, I say, in fact, when I returned to the company because I wanted to retune, I listened to 580 people in groups of 20. They would come in groups of 20. These are not persons with chief or director title, meaning excluding those. That number in groups of 20 had 5 minutes to say anything. They can say we should stop doing this, we should be doing this, whatever it is. And from that we made a list of projects, and I only came with 5 projects. One very key to me, one was an obvious one that needed to be done, and the other 3 were opportunistic. And then we made that from a list of 100 out of that. And then we started following 100 activities. So in a large company like this, if you run with activities at let me say CEO level with program management unit, then you are operating with around maybe 1,000 plus people, something in that range. And the company is 33,000, including call centers. So you can move very fast when you do that. But of course, it's very burdensome at this level, because I see too much. Now, that I prefer to do it this way in order to motivate the risk takers, the ones that are willing to take a risk. The challenge is, how do you reward the risk? Yep. So I play by you won't be punished if it doesn't work as a minimum guarantee. And then, you know, I mean, if you're going to get a bonus X, if this works, you may get 2x, something like that. So, which is the only tool that I have. But definitely, they feel very comfortable taking the risk to start with, because most cultures, they would be blamed. Yep. And I think in big companies, you'd be surprised to know that if they know that they're not going to be blamed, you can get a lot out of them, because they really want to do things. I think this is one kind of like lesson, but it's very burdensome on. But if you have a strong project management unit, and especially if you have a strong business development and strategy, as I do have, then in fact a lot of the time we're sharing it over 5 people.
Yeah. Cool. Well, look, I'm very conscious of time, and we've got other sessions to go, but thank you very much. There was a ton of really useful information there. And I think one of the things that a lot of startups and small businesses don't understand, but you emphasized a number of times, is that they're dealing with employees on the other side. So it might make perfect sense for your product or your business to be bought by this company, but there's a whole bunch of different motivations that they're probably not aware of. And so getting, starting to have those conversations, finding mentors perhaps within the sector and kind of learning that way is there. But the opportunities are clearly there, and it's clearly a good path.
But you see yourself, I mean, thank you for giving me your books, by the way, and I looked through, I'm really very interested in them. But for example, someone like you, and what you do, and I'm very impressed with those approaches that you're doing. When you're dealing with those companies or dealing with an investor, these are your companies now.
Yep.
So because you are technically have a carry, so technically you're a shareholder, in a way.
Yeah. So very different. I mean, we deal entrepreneur to entrepreneur, and I love having those conversations. So you're not an employee, actually. You yourself are an entrepreneur, and your form of compensation is that. You see, that's why you are not a normal employee like you have in a telecom company. Exactly. Yeah.
But then perhaps we shouldn't have that many people like you. I'm joking.
Could we please give a big round of applause for Paul Doany? Thank you. Thanks.